Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Friday. Welcome to Let's Build Daily. I'm your host, Chris Carolan. Yesterday, I definitely took a lot of time talking about the overall need for a RevOps roadmap and how a lot of the building process ends up being a communication execution and the importance of bringing everybody into the room. And so today I wanted to go through the tools I've been using to help companies create a roadmap. But you're rarely gonna see me talk about tools and tactics without reiterating and making sure we're aligned on strategy. So, as a reminder, the why, we understand at this point, whether we accept it or not is another story, but this is a buyer's journey. And we know that staying top of mind at every point in the process will result in revenue and growth for our companies. How do we stay top of mind throughout each stage of the journey? If we can be the number one resource and the best partner, we will do that. We will stay top of mind. So today we're going to talk about this is an easy goal to document and say we want, but then we see this and it's the ocean that we need to boil. Without this roadmap, we don't add 1 ounce of proactive energy into trying to boil any piece of this, right? Instead, we just stagnate. So to put it into a little bit more context, instead of this vacuum, I got to this point after taking the RevOps bootcamp course earlier this year from HubSpot. And it was fabulous. So a lot of the tools and understandings I got from that course, and highly recommend it to anybody that is worried about improving their revenue operations. And I'm going to use a couple slides from one of the weeks that was about improving RevOps processes. And unfortunately, from the inside and now from the outside, I'm seeing that so much of this and why we talk about strategy versus tactics boils down to this. When you're stuck in your day-to-day, you are always making tactical decisions. You're always making reactive decisions. That's never going to get you where you want to go in terms of change, in terms of proactive growth, right? Proactive support for the growth. So many companies are letting growth happen to them, and their people are suffering for it. So here we talk about, in this case, but honestly, this is in so many departments. Everybody on the ground is only doing tactics because we're just fighting fires every day, right? So then we look for other people that help us fight the fires by bringing another hose, not by asking them to prevent the fires, right? So what we're talking about is how do we do less firefighting? We don't need more people to fight the fires. We need less fires. So in this case, creating the future state process maps and just roadmaps and prioritization of any kind helps teams align and really creates this space to turn all of these unproductive conversations that we're having every day into productive. And here's why it feels like you got to boil the ocean. And this slide, when I first saw it, I was like, just clicked immediately. It's like, okay, I get it now. Building empathy for why these problems aren't being addressed, why digital transformation fails. Non-shared KPIs or conflicting incentives. Right? We've got multiple people working on selling products now because the buyer journey is way outside of the direct sales process, yet the direct sales team is the one getting compensated for the sales, no matter how much support they're getting from other teams. Is an example of a conflicting incentive when other teams and people aren't getting compensated at the commission level for sales. Missing information. Working with a client now, they have to quote out of an ERP, and so that process sucks. And if I'm doing that process and I'm new, I need to get the quotes out. I can't take forever. If there's information that I don't feel is necessary to me getting the quote out or the customer needs, I'm not adding it. And because I'm not adding it and the other person is adding it, now we're doing things in different ways. If we define a process at all. This inherently annoys the people around us. And this is what creates those daily unproductive conversations, complaining about team members, complaining about having to log into systems. Everything's manual. And this is where digital transformation is hard, because there was a time where everything was manual, and we would go and hand the orders to the next person to process the orders. And the accountability feedback loop was verbal. And when you're in the office and something happens, it's very easy to tell everybody else about it, whether you want to or not. And that creates inherent accountability that I don't want to do that again, or I will come and fix the problem. As we go digital, that doesn't work. Too many tools that do the same thing and or don't integrate. Customer churn or negative feedback. People don't know who is responsible for executing the process. I get it. All this stuff is new and you never had to do it before, but that doesn't mean you just don't do it, or somebody, the marketing person, because they brought the problem up, means they get to solve it, even though they're not in charge of any of it. And we've got all these systems in place that nobody owns outside of a break fix, perspective. Manual, inefficient processes that could be automated. Again, at some point in time, we could not automate these processes. That's why we haven't done it yet. Now we can, and we should where necessary. Processes that can't be reported on or measured. Processes that happen in other systems and tools without syncing. ERP and CRM is a great example. Having to re-input data over and over and over is such a big waste, like one of the biggest wastes, and it needs to matter. People don't trust the data representing this process. Every leader doing reporting, forecasting using different data and systems. So when the sales leader or the CFO is exporting data out of your CRM or ERP or accounting system so they can do their spreadsheet magic, right? It's because they don't trust the data in the systems. And now there's different views of how the business is doing. Different team members having to repeat the same work. So this is the ocean again. And most companies I've talked to check every damn one of these boxes, every single one. So that's the feeling of overwhelm. If you're trying to help these companies or you're inside, like, and the problem is that these are all individually, impactful in their own. And the more that exist, the more impactful the overall problem is. And the harder it is to know where to start, right? So that's why we're here. We've got to start solving some of these immediately, and all of them over the long term. So how do we do that? So this is a workbook that came from aforementioned RevOps Bootcamp. And here we're simply starting with an assessment, right? We've got some general statements, and in this case, we have some HubSpot specific statements, right? So we're just looking to create some awareness about where we're at, right? From a pretty, subjective standpoint. And it relates to a lot of the things that we're on, the previous slide. And what's interesting is, like, again, we treat this as if it's never happened before in some of these organizations, when a lot of these things, when you flip it to a production side and production data and ISO quality systems, we do this. We've done this for years. We might have to do it every year. So if you can help your organization or your client understand that you've done this before, now we're just applying it in this scenario instead, right? That can help with some participation. Then we have our current state process mapping. And this is just an example. We've got some links here. Lots of good examples out there. But here is where I've chosen to use Canva as a way to help tell a better story, to get the engagement early on needed to have a successful, complete process. So, taking the time to map current state is just so important, so that you can create a foundation to speak from as you're moving through this process. A foundation that everybody can see, and it doesn't have to be like this unknown quantity during every conversation that you have, where you have to repeat yourself and nobody is aligned on the definitions of what things mean, right? So a huge part of this, and this comes back to communication strategy, is doing this in a place that is easily, shared, is easy to collaborate on, is easy to, comment on. Maybe spending less time worrying about how do we make sure smart people don't screw up the diagram? How do we lock it? How do we manage permissions? Again, we're coming back to like cultural and internal communication strategies here. Like, if we're always worried about things that prevent transparency, we're never going to be transparent, and we're going to have a lot of silo problems. So choosing the right tool and sticking with it is, a good way forward here. So then we get comments on it. We do some future state, road process mapping, like based on those comments. And throughout this, here, like these first three tabs. And then if we come back to, this list, as we're assessing the situation, we should be building a possible project list at the same time. And this is where, until you get to this list and the roadmap, it's a very, like, the conversation is up here. It's not tangible yet. It's something I can't really contextualize. So we'll talk about it every week, and we're not going to make a lot of progress until we get to real lists here. It's just hard to participate and get everybody's participation in a meaningful way that we can come back to week after week and say, this was how we agreed on this stuff. This is what was documented. It's not about, oh, what did we say last time? Or what did that mean last time? You got to get past those moments. That's why I want to share the how-to here, because as consultants and coaches and agency partners, I would much rather have somebody come asking for help and have all this stuff figured out, have their current state understood. Obviously, they haven't figured everything out, or else they wouldn't be coming to us for help. But if they don't have their current state understood, and they don't have a common language, then the process of helping them is way more difficult. And you don't get to the high impact activities. It's bad enough that we got to start with this place that will not have an immediate impact tomorrow, right? But it's so important to have this foundation to move towards impact. So we have create this project list as we're moving through this process. And our goal is to do some impact and effort analysis, doing some scoring. That leads us to the roadmap, and maybe we are creating some Gantt charts. At this point, we're trying to develop a base of documentation and information that is clearly understood, can be consumed by whoever needs to be involved in the process in easy ways, in repeatable ways. Because if we're using different tools, if we're using Word files that are saved locally and we can't collaborate on them, the maintenance of all of this documentation becomes the burden, and that's why it's never getting done. So the tools that we use to create and empower collaboration and communication are critical, right? So what are we worried about as we create this project list? Okay, so here we have system process. What's the problem or observation that gets it onto this list? Why is this a problem? What's the potential solution? Thinking about future state. How will this solution solve the problem? What are the steps to get to the future state? Which stakeholders are impacted or own the problem, right? Identifying people and making sure it's very clear in these documents who's involved and when and how, and what the expectation is of them is what we're moving towards. Because if you're in RevOps or you're the accidental admin and you create this list and you don't focus on that part, guess who gets to do the list? That's right, you. No matter who's actually in charge of the systems, processes, people involved, because it's on your list and we don't have a communication strategy. We don't know we haven't identified who's in charge of what and who's impacted. We can't delegate it to other people. We can't get their involvement. We have potential metrics for tracking success. And then after this initial effort, or even during, this commenting, the whole commenting process, and whoever's engaged, we, want to highlight one for like making sure, everybody's seen and heard, but also like down the road, if somebody mentions they had a problem with this thing and now all of a sudden they don't, that's okay, but they need to tell us what changed, right? And if we're not documenting that, it's difficult to do. So as an example, we have deliverable pipeline implementation, problem or observation, and deliverable pipeline implementation. In this case is related to a deliverable custom object that we want to manage after the sale in HubSpot. So the observation, there is no infrastructure for managing product or service fulfillment. That doesn't also hinder data and cause visibility problems within HubSpot, likely because we're doing it in deals and tickets in a place that we should not be doing it. Why is this a problem? Lack of clarity on pipeline ownership, too many hands, lack of granularity on order fulfillment, because since we're using, let's say a deal pipeline in this case, we've got some purchasing stages, we've got some operation stages, we've got some sales stages, right? Too many people involved, can't report on it. Handoffs are messy, right? So things fall through the cracks. What's a potential solution? Creating these custom objects in this case, creating a space to manage these things, properly. If we do that, we can close our deals, at the end of the sales process, generate deliverable records, give us the space to operate properly. And then we can have different owners. We can have different processes. We can have better reporting because we have more visibility, more granularity. How do we get there? Figure out what the fulfillment processes are that we want to support with this object, and then draft the HubSpot structure and implement it. All right, so that's just an example. If we like a potential metric relating to order fulfillment metrics. So have we missed orders in the past? Do we have problems with, on-time shipments or like people not getting everything that they ordered, right? Stuff like that. A lot of the quality metrics, maybe you can apply here. But so that's just an example. And if we look at this list, and again, you're starting with the one person who's in charge of this stuff, like a RevOps leader, if they exist. And what you'll find is there's cognitive dissonance between the projects that we're highlighting and the projects actually on their plate, right? So in this case, we see a Bitwarden software implementation, which when we think of terms like what is RevOps role and what is IT's role, in growing companies, when there is no IT yet, like we find stuff like this. Now, is this a revenue operations, project that should be on the RevOps roadmap? Probably not, right? But it's on that person's plate, so we need to understand it. And again, we're trying to create visibility to say, hey, we've got a lot of stuff here. Should this person be doing all of this stuff? What can be deprioritized? What can be delegated, right? We can only get to a productive version of that conversation if we're doing some documentation here, right? Because we've got some big stuff here. Like this is just an individual, like piece of HubSpot that we're implementing here. This is ERP implementation, right? So at first we're just everything, we're just getting it into the workbook, right? So that we can then have a conversation about, we can analyze it and start to prioritize it. All right, so we've got impact level. And I should note, like, when you're doing this analysis, this is why, if you've done all the other work and you've socialized it, right? Now we can have a conversation where we're not doing what I just did and like going over how this stuff works, how this process works. People have reviewed the material, and then we can have a conversation about what it all means and how we act on these understandings. If we can't get to agreement on what it all means, then we don't move forward. If anybody decides to move forward, there's always friction at the very least. And that's when you have a whole nother layer of problems to deal with. So we look at impact level. Low may influence our KPIs, but not significantly. Medium, solving this challenge will meaningfully drive our KPIs forward. High impact, this will be a major driver of value throughout our metrics. Effort level, this can be done. Low effort means this can be done by a single person and can be done in a single sprint. Sprint might mean something different to companies, but in a lot of cases, it's a 2 week, 2 weeks to work on a project and get it done. Some of these cases, it might be one person, taking the day to knock something out in HubSpot. Medium effort. This work requires a team, and we may not have all the expertise in-house. It's multiple sprints of work. High effort. This work requires additional paid software or external contractors and will likely take sprints to plan and additional sprints to execute. Change management level. See, even in this, this is the part that almost everybody underestimates. And granted, it's very hard to, quantify in a lot of cases, even though we have some help here. But even as we call this, impact and effort analysis, I want to change it to say like change analysis, or just make it obvious at every point. Like, we can't forget about this part, right? So change management level, low, little to no training or modification of existing process required. Medium, requires some training and change of how people work day to day. High, would require a fundamental shift in how people work every day. This is why, like, if you're going through the process and you realize you don't have a good training program, it's going to be very hard. Life's going to be hard to do this stuff. You're going to be having one-to-one training sessions all the time, and that's the stuff that makes everything take longer. So here we've brought some stuff over, and start giving it, some scores. And this is where, like, hopefully, like, if we've done the work and people have this ahead of time, they've consumed and digested these meanings of these scores, right? Now we can have a focused conversation on these 3 columns, right? Without having to review how the process works, what it all means, right? We just get right down to business. And when we come out of this, maybe we're scoring it, but there's still some intangibles here, right? And this is where leadership, you got to have alignment to assess the situation properly, because we have these, back out a little bit here. So we've got core process mapping, right? It has a high impact because if we're not doing it, we're constantly in the dark about what's working, what's not. We can't speak of a place from a place of common language. Effort level, it definitely requires a team. Maybe we get some help from outside. Maybe it's multiple sprints, but this is where if it's if there's some focus on it, then it honestly shouldn't take as long as most people, think and most people are worried about, right? It's just mapping what you're doing every day. And if you focus on marketing and then sales and then, order management, and then production, this is where like most of the production stuff's done already in a lot of these cases. So we're just adding on top of that. And even like look at that stuff and let it inspire you on how you approach this stuff. All right. Change management should be low. Right. We're not trying to modify anything at this point. Right. We just need to get it done. Same thing with the customer journey. All we're doing is we're trying to represent current state, the way that customers flow through the business right now. Then we have ERP software implementation and customer-facing portal implementation. High impact, high effort level, high change management level. This is why these are often pie in the sky projects that we want to do, but let's talk about it next month, next quarter, next year. Because we can't possibly fathom what it's going to take to get these done. Or I did it X years ago. It was the worst experience in my human lived experience. So I don't even want to think about going through it again. Because no way in the last 5 or 10 years could it possibly be better than it was back then. I digress. So we're trying to prioritize here. This gets us closer. Again, understanding that this is a process and just the simple fact of going through the process moves you forward. Now, the key to any of this is that action is taken at some point, right? But we want it to be meaningful action so that we avoid the feeling that I just brought up that we're going to do all this work and nothing's going to happen. We're going to end up with a system that we don't like and we paid a lot of money for, and we all hate it. Why would I do that again? I agree. Why would you do that again? Like, don't do that again. But if you understand you need to change, this is how you don't do that again. After lots of conversation, come to a roadmap, right? Break it up by quarters. Start to bring this stuff in. And this is the point, like between prioritization and roadmap, we're trying to get to some agreed state of being so that we can move forward from it. It doesn't mean this is etched in stone, right? Because in this case, so much of this depends, it's all connected, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that can't or shouldn't move forward before an ERP is selected and implemented, before we know how some of these things and their outcomes will impact the team, will impact the process, will impact the system, will impact our customers. But starting with a plan that should be reviewed monthly or quarterly, depending on the projects. And this is the thing, we already have these meetings in place, but since we don't have this documentation, everybody has their own spreadsheet, their own Word doc, their own email, that they bring to the table, and we all speak from this different place of what's happening in our world, while knowing that we're not aligned team to team as we do that, while knowing half the things on our list are not going to get done when we say they're going to get done. Why is that okay? Why do we keep doing that? Like, this is the epitome of things under our control that if we focused on them would massively improve the trajectory of the organization, would alleviate so much pain that you and your teams are experiencing every single day. And at some point, your customers feel that as well. And hopefully it's not too late for you to fix it. Got some other tabs here. Again, we're just trying to socialize a lot of this to help with understanding of what needs to happen, where we're at. Like, where are we now? Where do we want to go? What needs to happen to get to where we want to go? Right? So hitting on this, right? As I was creating this, I started out here and I was going to share just, this. We've got a process map here with some deal pipelines, in HubSpot. We've got all these different documents and spreadsheets that house information, right? That's often a great question to ask yourself if you don't know where to start. It's, where are all our spreadsheets? What are all the spreadsheets that we use to support our process? Right? Most of those need to go. And it should be like, if we are thinking about quick wins, like, it is unbelievably easy to import that data into a system like HubSpot. So it's the decision to do it in HubSpot instead of the spreadsheet that is holding you back. So I was putting this together and I was about to send it out. And I was like, even though all the people involved might recognize some of the words on this page, right? Might recognize some of the systems described. That doesn't mean you can just ask one time and say, hey, come and comment on this. And that's going to happen. In the most recent case, we ended up with 70 plus comments, a third of which were by the CEO, which definitely helped, right? Again, leadership alignment here and support for this activity is of utmost importance. And then everybody had about a week to comment on this, but everybody got it done. Sales leaders, operations, marketing, customer experience, executives, they came in and they said they shared their comments, right? So we got participation because it was easy to share this document. It was easy to show them how to comment. But the other thing that became easy, because just sending this would not have gotten that job done. So what I did is I created, a story around why this is an important activity, right? Making sure it's very clear, trying to remove uncertainty of what's happening. Why am I here? Where am I supposed to do this? Right? So putting this together, making sure they understand, even though they probably don't need to understand what every shape and thing means. If I haven't seen it before, I inherently want to know what it means, or I might have a question. So now, if I don't know what it means, maybe then I'm not going to comment on it, even though I know what the label is, right? So trying to, you're inviting people into a process that they've never done before, and you have to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. So you look for hurdles like that to remove. Then, study the diagram. So being able to create this story in the same space where I need them to do the work went a long way, right? When you send spreadsheets and Word docs and Google links and Lucid charts, like, it's overwhelming. And then you're not surprised when you don't get the engagement that you need to move through the process quickly, but you do certainly complain about it. Like, I wish people understood how important this was. I wish people, like, instead of telling me comments in the hallway, I wish they'd come into this document, right? They've got other things on their mind constantly. And if they have more than one or two places to try and engage in the way that you want to, they will not, right? Or they will do so very inconsistently, which wrecks the process again, right? And then we're spending time at the meeting talking about this stuff instead of actually talking about how we make progress. So I put this together, send it out. So 2, study diagram. 3, so study first, right? Like, take them through the steps. Don't assume. You should assume that they haven't done this before, that they're not good at it, no matter how high up they are in the organization, no matter what their experience level is. It helps remind, instead of coming in here, like, let's say I don't put study diagram and then make comments. They just come in, look for the one they hate the most, and they comment on that. They don't even worry about the rest, right? Try to slow the process down. Like, make sure, like, you understand you're not, you're setting expectations here. Then take a minute to understand what this diagram means, what it's trying to say. It's representing some of what you see in HubSpot. Like, once they can make that connection, okay, now I remember I don't like this, right? Contextualizing the process of what we're asking them to do. And then creating some accountability. Like, let's say this is full of names who are involved in the process. They've got to do this. Like, this is the one part where it's like, okay, do we really need to? This is them signing off. I did this thing, right? Whether it's 1 comment, 10 comments, 50 comments, that's what we want. They're engaged in the process, right? They are a part of it. Review and brainstorm. So now that this is in play, walking through for each department, what's working well, what can be improved, top 3 priorities. Because over here on the current state map, there's specific things to comment on. So we get very granular. Now it's, they could be filling this out while they do that, but it's more of like, what comes to mind, right? Trying to get, some conversation around and kind of formalize the things that we talk about and think about every day. So what's working well, what can be improved, top 3 priorities for improvement, right? And at this point, again, I realized as I was putting this together, this is an exercise of participation, of communication. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we don't act on here right away, because at the end of the day, we realize it's actually not a priority because somebody else said it in a different way, and we're going to take that approach, right? This is the best way to get people from behind closed doors, from behind their silos, and realize everybody has the same damn problem. So why haven't we done anything about it? Because we haven't formalized a path forward. Once we have that, if it makes sense to at that point, right, In the case of like an ERP is coming, right? Maybe we get help from the ERP vendor, to do this. What's up, Alexander? Good to see you. Create our list. Confirm internal communication plan. This is really about just as much about who's in charge of what and what the participation level is expected and when, right? As it is the how, like which tools are we using? Where are we keeping track of this information? How many meetings are we going to have about it? When are we talking about it? Right? Then we can actually move forward with a roadmap. So that's it in a nutshell. And, depending on how many people involved, how focused we are on doing the activity, differing levels of leadership support, right? Those are the things that impact how fast this can go. 4 weeks to 8 weeks is generally, how it could work. It's possible. You got to start moving forward on digital transformation if you have not. Like, again, if you're there and your organization checks all these boxes as a leader and you're seeing this, and it's so easy to say our bottom line is good. So this must not be like, I can worry about this later. Just think about your people on the ground level that are suffering through all of these things every single day. You've got some real champions. You've either got some real champions that, are so loyal that they're just suffering through it and doing their best, or you're having a turnover problem, likely both. And even in that nuance, just because your long-term people are not letting this thing stop them, does not mean you should expect new people to come in and just get on board with awful processes and outdated systems. This is not a simple fix, right? We're trying to build complex systems to solve a complex problem. So keeping it simple is no longer an excuse. We can't boil the ocean is no longer an excuse. We've got to find a way. And I'm optimistic that if we can get leaders to understand this process, that they will participate. And now they are in a position to resource the organization effectively. That's the ultimate goal of this activity. Like, do we understand as an organization what digital transformation is and what it takes to get it done? Because if we don't, then we're paying all sorts of people and buying all sorts of tools that we think are going to solve the problem, and they're not. If you want some help with this, let me know. If you want to, maybe go through some of this workbook, maybe go through, this assessment live on this show, right? Maybe you can do it for a previous company or a hypothetical company. I know it's tough to put yourself out there sometimes, but we've got to help each other and educate on this stuff, or else, at the end of the day, our customers are settling because the companies we count on are not doing this effectively. And we've got to find a way. I hope this was helpful. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend and rest of your week. And while you're thinking about this stuff, find the opportunity and let's grow.